Welcome to the HR Dialogues, a show where we talk about HR and the future of work. I'm your host, Dr. Veldsman, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, Debra Bradford. Welcome to the HR Dialogues, where we learn from people practitioners as they navigate the emerging world of work. Debra, as introduction, so many ways to introduce you. HR executive, business consultant, professor. Who is Debra and what brings you to our episode of the HR Dialogues?
Well, hello to everyone in the audience, and thank you for having me today on the show. Really, I'm an old-fashioned country girl who was literally blessed with strong business acumen. I excel at people strategy by combining strategic HR, compliance regulations, transformational OD, leadership coaching, and all of this to align employee behaviors with organizational goals and the management style of senior stakeholders. I am definitely a serial entrepreneur, have started many businesses, sold a few, ran a few right into the ground. But when it comes to people strategy, I am very much about pro business, but pro business along with pro people. That's me.
I love that balance between the two. And I think especially in today's world of work, such an important one to have to be able to balance business needs through a people lens. Debra, where are you joining us from?
I'm joining you from Reading, Pennsylvania, which is about 45 miles northwest of the city of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania.
Perfect. Fantastic. So, Debra, before we jump into our topic today, we like to get to know our guests a little bit better on the HR Dialogues. And I think to kickstart, I'm going to ask you the question, what piece of advice has stuck with you in your career?
Two things. One, my love of numbers. Sort of early in my career, I realized as my accounting career was moving forward, my bosses were saying, people are numbers, like you can't advocate for both. And I'm like, why can't I? So this mind opening and heart opening fact that you can do both judiciously and fairly without having to say, I'm all for the people and not for management, and all for management / company and not for people. But I would say what truly gives me my strength is being able to align my work with my personal values so that I sleep very well at night, even after a knockdown drag out with several clients.
Debra, what brought you to the HR side of the business? You've mentioned you started out in accounting.
I was more often than not explaining why we need to be good to the people in our organization versus just the understanding of the financial bottom line. So a mind opener to me was the triple bottom line when it became a thing to talk about. It really was under corporate social responsibility, but I was like, light bulb, hello, people. And I feel that my ability to take a soft initiative that isn't very obvious on the cost or the savings and turn that into financial numbers that mean something to the financial mindset of leaders makes a huge difference. But for me, it was because I was stunned that I'm driving home after work going, I wasn't talking about the retained earnings. They weren't upset about that. As an owner, I would have been upset about that. But they were upset at my advocating for an additional 30 or 40 grand to go to something that was going to end up returning 2 or 3 times that amount of value to the company. So it was that debate, realizing that I had this cycle going on or pattern, and then just going into the pattern instead of fighting it and saying, no, I'm all about numbers. It's like, no, I think I'm making a shift here.
No, that's fantastic. And Debra, give us a bit of insight just in terms of what keeps you busy today. What does your day-to-day look like and what do you get involved in?
Well, I run a small consulting firm. I call it a boutique. We just are a very small team. We get to take on the clients that we really want, the work that we really want. We don't just say, bring any and all work to us. But really, that ties my time up. Developing other HR professionals is a passion. I didn't realize I was so good at it. But my kindness, I think, and understanding of the challenges in HR helps a tremendous amount. But I also spend a lot of time in research and development on what does the public want? What can we put together? How can I help you do it?
Love that. And I think that brings us very nicely to segue into the topic that we'll be talking about today. And Debra, we wanted to explore corporate universities and to take a step back today and reflect on both our experience pertaining to, firstly, what are they and do they work, and to really start looking at, in an economy that is very tight at the moment, where organizations really have to be intentional about how they invest and where they invest. A lot of questions being asked about people development and people development investment specifically, and what that's going to look like in future. So let's start with the basics. When I say corporate university, what is that and what does that mean? Corporate universities, in my experience, also show up under various names and various guises, right?
For a very small business, it could just mean their training program that they're developing in-house. But for very large corporations, they are doing it. I really have to say, I've seen those corporations that have done a very good job, but they have had to invest a tremendous amount of money, excuse me, on the trial and error, because the first iteration maybe didn't quite get the results that they needed. And then that could be the end of the entire mindset right there for that corporation. Other corporations have gone farther.
So perfectly to your point, smaller organizations, it might just refer to certain training programs they have in place focused on, for example, developing middle management or developing future leaders or some technical skill sets. Whereas, I think some of the global organizations put a lot more structure around that and run various academies, from sales academies to, leadership of the future academies,
So
women
why
in
is
tech,
sales
women in...
always the first? Like, oh, let's not worry about how we manage our people, but let's make our sales team memorize that script and get out there and deliver. But you're right. I wish we could see more of that intentionality toward the overall organization, especially their C-suite for succession planning. Get that knowledge out of that brain into some piece of technology.
Mm. And I definitely agree with that, because I think the organizations that I've seen do it successfully, they do have quite a wide spread, but it's really based on a very good understanding of what are the, call them capabilities, call them competencies, call them skills, that is going to make us successful as an organization. Because I do believe that corporate universities or academies that focus on very broad strokes, in my view at least, is a little bit too generic to really make a difference in their context.
Yeah, I agree. I think there are two sides of that. One, the trainings developed by corporations can be so specific that they become obsolete much sooner than they believe that they will. But then this is going to go a little off center. I also feel that when CEOs and C-suite executives are sitting down and they're looking at their quarterly or year-end numbers, they do 2 years down the road look at that training that's been developed as an asset. And then they want to make that for sale, whether it's to the general public at large, which is a mistake because it was developed specifically for them in-house and their needs. The language will be very different inside of that corporate training than I would expect as an outside person going, oh, $49. I'm gonna take this training really, really quickly. And then that turns out to backfire on social media when their customers are saying, oh, I paid for this training, but it didn't give me what I thought it was going to give me. So there's a real wide conversation to have about that.
But this balance for me between, because I think there's pros and cons, right? Because you can outsource your corporate university and just send people through, I think a very good, and I think there's a lot of really good corporate executive education programs out there, versus on the other side to have things that are contextually specific for us, what we are doing. And I've always found in organizations this balance to have the conversation to say we want to know what's happening outside, but we also want to be able to localize certain core elements around what's going to make us successful, what is our competitive advantage. And, we see it in various guises, right? The insert company way, of leading, or the insert way to sell. And I think it's interesting for me that in especially the environment that we find ourselves in, this blended approach, in my opinion at least, seems to be yielding a lot more value and benefit from a long-term sustainability point of view, being able to flex up and down, working with best-in-class partners around the table, but then on the other side also knowing what is unique to your context and environment and what you never ever want to outsource somewhere else.
Absolutely agreed. And companies are very good in stating their differentiators. Very, very good. But how do they take that differentiator and make it something that's heartfelt so that that value, that service, that level is expressed by all employees at all levels of the organization, regardless of which stakeholders that employee is dealing with. And therein lies another challenge for corporate universities. If they're not including the fundamentals of the topic, the way, let's say, your organization would do, or if I'm creating a piece of customized training that I would do, if the fundamentals are not there, what you're doing is you're teaching someone how to mimic versus learning. And when someone truly learns something, oh, now you have the power of their independent personality and how their personality is going to work with that knowledge and how that knowledge is going to spin around and come up with amazing ideas. But if the fundamentals are not a part of the training, now you have someone who's parroting what you've told them, but you're not going to really achieve the, I would hope to believe, the fundamental goal, which is creating better ideas and stronger platforms. And your engineers come to work going, aha, that's sort of what we are looking for. And when we have that, the cost of developing the university, not a challenge. Or the cost of outsourcing it, not a challenge because we see the value.
Mm. I sometimes smile when, we also speak to clients and we usually get two pieces of feedback, right, when we do academies. The first question is always around, how practically applicable is the learnings going to be to my environment, which I think is a
First
very
question they're
fair,
going to ask.
definitely, which is a very fair statement to make. However, I do believe, and this touches on the point that you've just mentioned, this blend between wanting to understand, call them fundamentals, theory, where things come from, what the concept really is, and then that translation component around what does it mean in your environment, and how do you go and apply it further in terms of creating that value. I think that full, call it a value chain or development cycle, is such an important component, because what I also fear, especially in the complex environment that we live in today, is that we get to a point where people only learn little fragments in the moment, and we start actually diluting the learning experience, so people never holistically understand and are able to make connections between seemingly unrelated concepts. Now, I know I'm preaching to the converted here, but let's get back to a corporate university. If I am a business leader and you are speaking to me wearing an HR hat, how do I sell this to business to showcase the value to them beyond the argument around that training is important?
I really think the pain points are there. So for me, selling is more of a relationship building. Once I get to know an executive, I know I'm not selling this person anything for about a year. I'm getting to know them. And as they get more comfortable with me, they do start to share, let me tell you what happened last week or last month. And I'm like, aha, now you trust me enough to tell me something about the experiences that you're having. So now we can have a conversation. And for my small business, it's even more challenging because a good number of time a CHRO will come to me and say, hey, Deborah, I've got X number of people I want to get trained. Give me a price.
Mm. Mm. Yeah.
There are so many variables. Like, do you want to do this in 4 weeks? Do you want to do it in 18 weeks? Like, there are so many variables to design a program that's going to fit the learner and meet the goals of the organization who is funding it. So it does become a challenge. But as soon as those pain points are understood, very easy conversation. And in our marketing, we can surmise the pain points and we can start to explain them. And if you're feeling anything like that, perhaps you want to open up your calendar for a quick meet and conversation to see what we can do about it. But if you can't reach and communicate the pain point or your understanding of it or your concern about it, I don't really think that that's a sale point yet. Still warming up the audience maybe, but not a time to close. Nonetheless, if we work hard in our sales, wearing our sales hat, we really are helping the general public. They don't know they need us until we help them see that they need us. And then once we have that consensus, let's develop something. But even with coursework that has already been developed, it's already on the market. It is the supervisor slash manager's responsibility to make sure that what you are buying in education is a fit for your need and is going to help you reach the goal that you have created. And I think that misalignment can become a future complaint from that person, because on our platform we offer money back, but we also try to make sure there is an alignment between what you're getting and what you think you're getting.
You mentioned two really important words there, right? I think the first one is know the pain point. and know what the need is. And because those are not necessarily always the same. I think sometimes people buy things to address a particular pain point, but it's not solving a deep-rooted need. It's kind of solving a symptom of something else. And then I definitely believe, and similar to you, that you're going to have to phrase it then and take people through a process there of saying, but what does this actually look like? Because I think the world where, I come in and I buy only a training that is a slight, small, one-time, point-in-time solution engagement, I think there's so much more value that we can offer given the types of channels we have today. You think about, immersive learning, think about e-learning, think about all the different types of virtual realities that we get within the education space today. But it does call for a bit of a different conversation around when value will materialize and what value is going to look like. And maybe to bring that back to your earlier point, I sometimes wonder if that's not why sales gets all the attention. Because first, we can see what the outcome there is going to be. My experience, it's usually sales first. Then we start worrying about digital talent. Then we worry about leadership development for the future. And by the time we've set up and established everything, we want to start the cycle again. And there are so many stakeholders that get left out in the cold a little bit,
Absolutely.
of which I think HR, and I'm always biased towards the HR professional. I think HR gets left out in the cold quite a bit after we've done all the work for everybody else and setting them up. Then we realize, but oh my goodness, we've not developed our own people. We don't have an HR academy in place.
Exactly, 100% agreed. And back to your original point of trying to understand the pain point with the prospect or client is a challenge, because I've had a lot of clients come to our consulting firm with an underscore, here's the root problem, please get in here and fix it. And we take the mindset of, I'm sure you're right, but we want to just do a little discovery before we put together a plan for something we haven't seen. And when we get involved, we find out that the pain point is true, but the underscore problem is not coming from where the leader thought it was coming from. The discovery shows that it's coming from someplace else. So again, strategy is still critically important, especially in education, because an organization that, let's say, has an engagement with your company and they are enjoying the training. Excellent. Mark that down, because so many organizations will sell you training that's watered down. It's not really robust, and you don't know it until you're halfway through it and you're like, oh my God, can I get my hour back? And you cannot. So I agree with all that you're saying, but it is not a simple problem.
So, Deborah, what does good look like? And I know that's such a broad question that we can probably
That's not a
spend
fair question.
hours on. But I mean, what are some of these things to look at? Because to your point, I think a lot of people, content is king these days, but content is also everywhere. So it's no longer just the content piece that actually makes the difference. It's, for me, the whole package. Where does the content fit? Is it contextually relevant? How is it portrayed?
I think the first non-negotiable is what makes it so cost prohibitive. And that is that the training is being delivered in multiple modes. It's not just reading text on a screen. And even if you can change the color of the background, the color of that, all wonderful, but that's one mode. Some people don't learn well that way. Some people need video. They need something that excites them, or they need the story told in a story format. Other people are bullet point people. Just give me the bullet points and let me go. And this is a question that has many sides, because we're talking about adult learners. And adult learners already know who they are. You can't tell them, okay, here's how you're going to learn, the way I can start out with a kindergarten or first grader, because they are like, is that how we learn? Adults are not that way. So that is, I'd say, the first thing. But the second thing would be quality of content and how valid and reliable that content is against the measures of my organization's concern for success. So when you say, what does good look like? If they have a measurement tool, let's start with that measurement tool. Let's have someone, let's say, sit in to just overview or audit my training. And at the end, let's complete your measurement tool and see how well did we do.
I think sticking towards, I think the mode conversation is a very important one, especially these days around a core focus on accessibility for people with regards to digital learning. I think such important work that is taking place, in that particular space. And then on the other side, I do like the view around that let's agree on what success looks like for you aligned to your business. I'm going to be slightly sneaky here and ask you the question around return on investment, because most people will ask that question immediately to say, if I'm going to invest X amount in a corporate academy or even just in a basic leadership development program, I want to know what the ROI is going to look like. And yes, we know there's models out there. We know they work in levels and maturity, etc. But let's talk the real deal. What does ROI look like in terms of people development in organizations?
Well, on a personal note, if I am working with my team, I want to see them return to work when they're finished with the training and be able to do something better.
Mm.
And if it's not better, I'll take different. Even if different is mistake, I'm okay with that. They can make a few mistakes. No one's going to die. And we might learn something. The mistake might turn out to be brilliant. But I think that that is very important. And I think that is the first level of ROI is what you're seeing. Now, it depends on the training category, because if we are certifying professionals who are already employed and are being put through the training by their employer, then the employer wants to see that they pass the certification, number one. And that could simply be the ROI, because being able to say that everyone on my team is a certified professional is huge, especially in the human sciences, like
Mm.
magnet hospitals. They want everyone to have a bachelor's degree and everyone to have a certification in the area that they work. So I would say that that is the obvious, but also when organizations are developing their employees, that's a personal ROI for that employee. So that feeds into so many initiatives from HR, from recognition all the way to reward, all the way to development, even your succession planning. Because I know what knowledge my executive has. So I need to have 4 people learning those same things and coming up the ranks, so that if ever there is growth and that executive goes somewhere else, I've got another executive or 2 or 3 to select from who are ready to fill that. But if I have no internal development process,
Mm.
even if I'm putting it together with some internal and some external, you still need to have a plan for keeping your knowledge inside of your organization and growing your knowledge so that your organization grows. But I think that for the biggest challenge is when I say, oh, we can probably do this for $5,000 per person on your team. It's, wait a minute, what is that? And then I'm working from that position forward. But I don't find it to be a challenging conversation, because I'm not going to put that number out there without understanding what you need and having put it together. And I can show you all of the components. And it is very much like a cafeteria style
Mm.
process, with me at some point standing over your shoulder as a salesperson saying, this will void your warranty. That's not going to get you where you need to be, that type of thing. But it is a broad conversation to have. And often just the personal fulfillment of the employee who's receiving the training can be the ROI all by itself. It can turn an employee who is 100% compliant but not committed into a 100% committed employee who's going to bring you 200% return the day after training than the 90% they were giving you the day before.
Mm. I also believe that that L&D sometimes falls into the trap that all HR functions fall into, where we typically look at success as defined from our functional domain, right? Whereas if you continue to look at it that way, you will forever be held ransom to operational metrics like how many people went through this, what was the adoption, what did that look like, how did that translate back into the workplace. Whereas I do think that if you start looking much broader than that, you start seeing the impact points in other components, like you mentioned,
Agreed.
in terms of I learned a new skill, I'm doing something slightly differently. Because I'm doing something slightly differently, I'm more engaged. How does engagement translate to productivity, for example? And those type of metrics are more complex to monitor and more complex to measure, but I do think they are much more valuable when we start thinking beyond, can I call them the face level, metrics that I
Mhm.
know is important, but the story can't stop there.
A really good instructor or facilitator can be all the difference in just one attendee's attitude or mindset about what they're learning. When we are standing in that role, when I am standing in that role, I feel like it's, outside of being a mom,
Mhm.
the most important job that I get the blessing to do is to help people have that aha moment and change the way that they think. Because employers today, for most jobs, not all jobs. We're not hiring people to move data from here to there. We're hiring you to think.
Mm.
And then you decide how the data should move. Should it move from here to there? Where maybe 60 years ago, we were like, just look at us. If it's a green light, you move it. If it's a red light,
Yeah.
back to Ford Motor and GM and all of those studies that happen. Today, we want human interaction. We want the mistake potential, but we want it because we want to give our employees a challenge and an opportunity to show some creativity. Even in an industry where there seems to be no creativity, there is a little bit.
And I think we should celebrate that, right? So I think sometimes we become extremely rigid also about what these things mean. I'm, a firm supporter and believer that experience drives a lot of different elements from an outcomes point of view. And I think we sometimes don't think about that holistic experience, and we just think about the program or in the moment and not where it fits, which is, back to our original point around corporate universities, why I sometimes do like the fact that it forces us to think beyond one program. It forces us to think about a journey over time at different levels with different engagements that people have depending on their reality, because that should also change depending on their career within the organization. They are not always going to be in one area, in one role, in one skill set. And I do
And
believe that
isn't that what we
academies,
want?
exactly right, that mobility question that we sometimes have. And I do think that academies and the corporate universities are great ways to foster that. I'm going to sneak in the question to you because I get this one a lot and I'd love your view on it. In that type of landscape, learning culture, how do we build a learning organization? How do we establish a culture of learning?
I think everything starts at the top. Leadership is about modeling the image that you want to see others model as they're following you. So if I'm leading a team or I'm leading an organization and I want them to start being, get that fire of knowledge running and on fire on blaze again, chances are I'm going to show them that I'm taking it serious by doing something with them. I wouldn't do it by myself because that sort of is elitist and maybe I'm the only one that gets to do this. No, how about we're all going to do it together? And now that I say that, since I would be involved, it has to be something fun. We have to learn something, but it also has to be fun where we can play a little bit and not act so seriously. But if that's what your leader is doing and your leader is doing it with you, it's going to take off like fire. But now if I send a contingent, even if there are, top executives, it'll take off, but it's going to be slower because I didn't do it myself. So I think that we do have to lead by example. And, we all know the parents, I think we're in a close enough generation who told us not to smoke while they were smoking didn't work. So I think if you really want to take off, you have to model the way. But secondly, it has to be a part of the strategic plan for the organization. It has to have behind it. It has to be seen as something that is important for the forward movement of the organization. And isn't it? Like, use my words, everyone. That's exactly what you're doing. But if you are not making it punitive, meaning you're sending your employees who didn't do the job the right way last month, and now their punishment is that they have to spend 2 days in training, they know it's a punishment. And that's exactly how they're approaching it. Like, oh God, I can't believe I have to do this. No ROI on that. Just a little bit of punishment happened. That's it. So that's what I would say they need to do. But I think also having an incentive behind it is always good. I love when I see corporations say, we're going to, when I mention that, they'll say, we'll put a budget behind it, but we want to make it reasonable. So even if it's $1,500 per employee per year for their own development, and then in the productivity evaluation system, I want it there. I want it to be something that's measured. So we're measuring how employees are working toward the corporate goals, but what about their personal career goals? Let's make sure that that is a part of their development as well. Because again, we're looking for fulfilled employees. I know that's probably more than you wanted, and I'll stop because clearly once I get the train going, I
No,
can
I
keep
think that
right
is,
downhill.
I think that's very valuable. I must say, I think the leadership enablement versus the leadership support argument, I think, is a really good one to have. It's a lot of CHROs do this, and I was also guilty of doing it. When I was in that position where you want to showcase the importance of something, so I joined for the first 10 minutes to kind of tell you how important it is, and then I disappear, and my behavior tells you that there's something more important than what I've just told you to be focusing on that I need to pay attention to. Love the fact also the alignment with and I think we've sometimes ignored this quite a bit, that yes, there's training that has to achieve organizational goals, but it has to be aligned towards individual choice and intent as well. I sometimes believe that learning cannot be a punitive component. Learning has to be a choice that somebody also makes to say, but I want to learn. I see the value of it. I see the benefit thereof. And, I'm a stickler for routines and rhythms and habits. And if you don't create those within the organization and an environment that encourages those different elements, learning never takes place.
Right.
You mentioned earlier, things just need to be slightly different, even though it's mistakes. You'll take the mistakes. If people are learning and in a learning culture, they will make mistakes. They will take more risks as well. You'll get higher rewards, but there will also be a lot of learnings along the way. And I think sometimes we stifle that because we say, but I've sent you on training. You're supposed to know how to do this in a perfect way. And we're our own biggest, victim and derailer in that regard. And I think that's something just to be careful
Aren't
of
we all?
around the fact that there's some unintended consequences of our behaviors that we are not necessarily able to monitor. Debra, I want to start wrapping up for us. It's been an amazing conversation, maybe a few takeouts before I ask you for some closing thoughts. I think the first one, really to talk about the fact that if you do establish a corporate university, you need to understand why you are doing it, what is the strategic intent behind it, and what is it actually going to accomplish. We also spoke quite extensively about the benefits and the limitations of internal versus external, coming to the conclusion that very often, depending on what your objectives are, a blend of the two solutions actually serves you best as an organization, getting the best of what's happening in the market, staying relevant, but also then knowing what is your competitive advantage, where you really want to spend your time and effort and focus your resources to make sure that you can drive your way, your competitive advantage of doing it. We spoke quite a bit about learning cultures and how they need to support the organization, how leaders need to be involved in that. And we spoke about the fact that what are some of those things to look out for and really take away when evaluating either a learning partner or evaluating just some of your own internal learning initiatives and content around their value and their ROI, and how we should be thinking very differently and measuring ROI differently in terms of our initiatives. Debra, last comment I'm going to ask you for. Give some advice to HR professionals listening today that, might have been in this role and environment where they've had to defend learning initiatives, all their life up to now. How do we encourage them? How do we motivate them that it's a battle worth fighting?
Oh, listen, you yourself as a professional, whoever is listening, want to be developed. Think of where you were 5 years ago and where you are now, or perhaps where you're intending to be when it comes to your own knowledge in 5 years from now. Your direct reports or those that you have charge over, especially if you're leading human resources, need to also be developed because businesses are moving fast, faster than we've ever seen. And in order for workforce to be ready, the knowledge needs to already be implanted. Otherwise, you're going to hurt your company by being behind the curve and having to react as opposed to be proactive. So be proactive with your education and your learning. Look for programs that are fun. And if you don't understand them, reach out and say, hey, I want to have a conversation about your service or your product, because we actually love those conversations.
Debra, where can people follow you and find out more about what you're doing? Where's the best place to connect with you?
You can connect with me at debrabradford.com website or on LinkedIn at Debra. My middle initial is D, Bradford. You can find me there.
Thank you very much for sharing your wisdom and sharing some of your battle scars with us in this conversation as well.
Anytime.
We will definitely catch up soon, and to our audience, have a great day further.